So if you're like a 20-year-old company or even older companies, I think you are kind of in trouble, right? Because your company doesn't have the DNA to innovate. The old saying, right? If you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
You really made full use of the MBA.
I made full use of it. Different people want different things, but what you do need to be consistent with what you want.
Sam, great to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Good morning, Frank.
Yeah, I just coincidentally find that we were in the same year in Harvard together with Susan and also Man.
Right. We're across the river. So Susan was in my section at HBS. I think you were at the Kennedy School, right?
Yeah, at the Kennedy School. Yeah. In the second year, I spent some time. I took two courses at HBS. So in the second year, in the morning I was in HBS, and then in the afternoon I crossed the river. So very, very different feelings.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's crazy. I was meeting with some folks. Someone in the HBS alumni office reached out. I grabbed coffee with her, and she was planning for our 10-year reunion. So it's kind of crazy that time flies. I graduated in 2017.
Yeah, definitely. Look forward that we can maybe catch up going back to school after 2 years, especially at this time when the school is facing tremendous struggling against a lot of things. So definitely a very unique time.
For sure.
Yeah. So Sam, very grateful that you are joining us for this show. As you might know that the series Aibrary Talk, we are creating a AI platform for lifelong learning, especially for people to read more books, to have personal growth from books. So when we talk about the books, personally, the book that impacted me most definitely is Chris Clay's. I think it's How Will You Measure Your Life, not the Innovator's Dilemma, but How Will You Measure Your Life. So I remember the days. It was my last course taken at Harvard after graduation.
Was that an HBS course or that was in the Kennedy
HBS course? Yeah, I know. You have like a build. Everyone is taking
building sustainable enterprise. Yeah, I didn't take it, but everyone took that.
After so many years, Sam, you have built a great startup doing really the innovation things, especially your startup. I did some research about the startups. I do believe it's a mimic of Clay's innovation theories in a lot of areas. So I think today we are going back a little bit about the days back in Harvard, the lessons we have learned, and also how you use the applications of the innovation or any other new understandings you have in your own amazing startup, and as well as looking forward what lessons can be learned in the area. Even though the book has been published for many, many years, but I do believe the theories and the classics, the fundamental will still be applicable in especially in the AI age, where people are facing a lot of competitors from the large companies and the emerging AI startups. So can you share a little bit about your time and at HBS, what brought you to HBS, and some experiences you had during that time?
Awesome. Great. Glad to be here. So Sam, I'm co-founder, CEO of a company called Thoropass. We're a SaaS company in the IT compliance space. I started a company 6 years ago, and now we're about 200 people, headquartered here in New York. I was born and raised in China, in Shanghai. I came to the States after high school, did my undergrad at University of Virginia, studied computer science, worked 4 years as a software engineer, first at Goldman Sachs, then at Google. About kind of 2 years into my career, I realized I'm not the best software engineer. I'm not the best coder out there, but I got more interested in business strategy and kind of thinking about the commercial impacts of the product that I built. So kind of developed the idea of going to business school and got into HBS. Coming to business school, I thought I wanted to become a consultant or maybe go back to Google as a product manager. So very coincidentally, I started, MBA is kind of very non-committal, right? So we just try different things at school, and ended up starting a company in the insurance space with a classmate. He's actually in my discussion group. So completely random. I come from a technology background. He was an investment banker. later PE investors. So the two of us teamed up with a company called Zinc Platform. This was an insurtech company in 2017. And we got into Y Combinator. We did a bunch of competition in the Boston area and got into Y Combinator that summer. That was the moment when I was like, okay, like this startup thing is not just a project or just kind of something you do for fun, right? There's actually a job or a career to build on top of that. So, start working on that. I was in the innovation lab, which is it's near HBS. It's like a space where all the entrepreneurs hang out. I was in there every day, kind of working on a startup. It was pretty fun. Actually also dropped out of HBS for a year working on that. But, unfortunately that one didn't work out. We raised some VC funding, but didn't really hit product market fit. Kind of learned a lot of lessons in that process. I went back to HBS, finished school, and I realized I want to do it again, right? I think it would be a little bit wasteful of my experience to, go back to become a consultant or a product manager. And luckily, there's a venture capital firm called Bain Capital Venture in New York, where they have an EIR program. It's called Entrepreneur in Residence. It's basically for kind of jobless MBA grads and failed entrepreneurs to have a home for a bit. So spend a year there thinking about startup ideas and eventually landed on Thoropass. This one obviously worked a bit better. We have scaled. But, I really enjoyed my HBS time. Obviously met, Susan and you, Frank, but I met my co-founder for my last company. I also met my wife there. So, I drank the HBS Kool-Aid and really enjoyed my time in Boston.
You really made full use of the MBA.
I made full use of it.
It so works well.
Good, thank you. So, obviously HBS did a lot of cases, studied a lot, and I didn't take Clay Christensen's class myself, but it was funny. Actually, my second year was his last year teaching. So they actually made a video of his last semester recorded. It was an interesting moment because he had a stroke a year or 2 years before that. So he was kind of struggling a little bit teaching, right? But, it was the last semester. I was not in his class. My wife was. But I think, like you said, the world probably changed more than any of us have expected. But classic innovation theory still stands. And, I feel like I'm literally observing that in my startup life every day.
That's really good to know. And also, especially when we said about your story after HBS, starting the new project instead of joining another tech, like huge consulting firm or investment banking or PE equity, etc. So can you elaborate, why did you choose to building a startup instead of doing the innovation within a large corp, but outside the large corp?
Yeah, like I said, it was very coincidental, right? Like, I didn't know too much about startup. I was a software engineer. I know how to build a product and how to write code in the context of a large company, right? But my co-founder for my prior company, he is more experienced and he really knows the VC ecosystem, which at the time was much smaller than it is right now. And I feel like that is a circle that is a little bit hard to break in for first-time entrepreneurs. So, being at Harvard and, working with him, I was lucky enough to kind of get an entryway into that ecosystem. And frankly, the first company, we were able to raise money based on PowerPoint. We're able to, scale, hire a team. We got into YC, so everything kind of feels great and looks great until one day you realize you don't really have product market fit and you're running out of money. You couldn't raise your next round. So it was a kind of very sobering experience from that, right? Like things were very easy. We look like a startup, we crack like a startup, but that doesn't mean much if you don't get your business really going. So, after that, like I said, I could have gotten a job, but I found this sort of soft landing was the EIR program. I also once you kind of work for yourself and have sort of done companies, like it becomes pretty hard to
go back, right?
Take a corporate job, right? The pace of things moving, the control that you have, the type of relationship you have with your colleagues versus your co-founders or early team is very different. And now 6 years later, I can't imagine not being a founder, to be honest, right? Like this may not be my last company, but I will be founding companies and organizations, I think, throughout my career.
Yeah, definitely very courageous. I was also in the Harvard Innovation Lab. At that time, I also built a project with my friends there. But after graduation from HKS, I still didn't continue that startup, but I joined a large corp. But last year, went outside the large company and started my own startup. Exactly like you have mentioned, it's really hard to going back, especially doing the things, the startup you love. So let's talk a little bit about the great startup you have built. I read the news that 3 years ago you raised a Series C. I know it's growing very, very fast. So let's going back to the start of Thoropass. How did you really make your unique entry point and survive among all those large competitors?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the concept of Thoropass started, the idea came from my experience running my last company. So, I'm sure a lot of, folks from other businesses have experienced this, but software companies, at a certain point in their journey, they need to be certified for different kinds of information security standards. It is a way for your customers to kind of have some level of trust that you are treating their data responsibly, and you have all the cybersecurity controls to, protect from being breached or protect from the bad people out there. So, my last company was in InsurTech. Everything was great until we started talking to a large insurance company. They were like, hey, I'm sure you are compliant with, XYZ standard, right? I'm sure you're HIPAA compliant. These are different laws, in the US. And we're like, I have no idea, right? I never heard of it at the time. And we end up trying to get one of those audits and certifications done. It turns out to be a very painful process. So like you said, there are incumbents in that space when we started, but they're all geared towards larger companies. Like if you're a Citigroup, if you're a Walmart, if you're like a Salesforce, no problem. You have all of those compliance programs set up. But if you're a 10, 20 person startup, it becomes very hard. There's no good services. There's no good tools for you to manage all the obligations you need to become compliant. The audit process is very painful. So that is the sort of pain point that I observed being basically the product that my second company sells, my first company would be a buyer for. And that's kind of my shortcut on kind of learning about the product market fit, which I think is the hardest thing for when you start a new company. Well, in all the senses, it's related to the topic and, Clay Christensen's concept in here that, disruptions tend to start from low end. In fact, I'm struggling to think of any disruptions that's not starting from serving the low end because the incumbents do have advantages. But at the time, they were not serving 10, 20 person startups because those companies don't have money, but they have the urgency to get the product that we sell. And that's how we enter in the market. And now we are much bigger, but at the same time, the startup market gets more competitive. So we're starting to move up market. But that's like a development that, took place a couple of years later.
Yeah, that was definitely a great move, especially in the area. I think the compliance industry is kind of regulated. It's different from like what we are doing in education, lifelong learning. It's actually like more like consumer based. I think the big four, the incumbents have established a relationship with those like regulators, etc. But as a startup, you entry, even though you're serving the lower end customers, you navigate a lot of obstacles among all those dynamics.
Yeah, it was not easy because I also, I was not an expert. Right now I guess I am. But like you said, right, the big fours are too expensive for smaller companies. They don't integrate with the technology stack that new companies use, right? So they're just not the best fit for this sort of low end audience, which is where we came in.
Got it. After already build some credentials among early adopters, I believe you served many of them are YC alums, or like how do you find all those early adopters?
Great question. We serve a lot of YC companies. We serve a lot of like startups that come out of different incubators, right? The early customers are always hard, as you know, as a founder, right? A lot of it comes from the founders network. Word of mouth, right? Because you don't have money to, advertise and kind of really go for it. But it really comes from, my investor network, my personal network, and a lot of word of mouth. I remember when we raised our Series A, we did our seed round in the summer, and by the spring, an investor called me. It's like, hey, I've been just casually sending you some leads, and that you told me you closed like 80% of them, right? That feels like there's something here, right? Like there's something, there's an unmet need in the market. There is things that you're doing that people really need, despite you being a very young company, which means your product's probably not very mature, and you're just getting started. So that's kind of the radar, the VC radar that comes in, right? Obviously, we raised a lot more money since then. So to answer your question, the first customers are hard. It's like brute force, but your job as a founder is to learn from them and kind of really examine your product market fit, right? Because you can easily spend 2 years, 3 years building something that is going nowhere. The only way to really know that is by really studying your early customers before you hire a sales team.
Well, that's good to know. So after that stage, you also mentioned you moved to mainstream to serve those larger companies. But at that time, the big companies competitors might enter because they find, oh, wow, this is lucrative. They might come. How do you navigate?
So we are, most of our customers today are still call it middle market, which I would say is bigger than the customers that we served in the early days, but still not like the multinational corporates. I think the truth is there's us and there are a couple other companies that really all VC backed, all grew very fast, that really come up in that. So we very quickly sort of cornered the startup market and the middle market, that the incumbents are like, oh, there's too much VC money going into this. I'm going to mostly just defend my enterprise accounts versus trying to compete. Because there are reasons, like, going back to the disruption theory, there are reasons why the incumbents don't want to serve lower end of the market, right? Because these are smaller companies, they pay less. A lot of my companies are startups, and startups, they die, which, that means they're not renewing my contract, right? So there are reasons why they don't go down, and these are pretty fundamental reasons. That's why disruption theory works. It is almost guaranteed that if you're a company, you become successful, you are going to start yielding the lower end of your market. So which is why every generation, every couple of years, there's a new wave of companies doing seemingly similar things, because the prior winner of the prior generation has moved on.
So since you mentioned there are every several years, there'll be new waves of disruptors. So now after many years, you are already a pioneer in the compliance industry. You became someone else existing.
That is very true. That is very true.
Large companies, especially those AI companies. How you feel the pressure currently?
I haven't felt that too much yet, but there are more and more companies getting funded. And in some sense, they are a more AI native version of what we do, right? Whether that works or not, no comment. But I'm very much a SaaS entrepreneur, adding AI capabilities to our technology versus an AI native entrepreneur that emerged in the past 2 years. So, I think I'm definitely also not an incumbent, right? But we're still very early in our journey. I think what's interesting now is with Gen AI, with vibe coding, I think the speed of this sort of generational companies gets much faster, right? Maybe in the past, it's like every 15 years, there's someone to come up. Like every 15, 10 years, there's a new wave of company disrupting, right? During my days, it's maybe every 3 to 5 years. Now, it could be every 2 years, every year, right?
Every several months.
Yeah, or several months, right? If you follow the AI news, it's just very hard to keep up. But the problem is the incumbents are not always 100-year-old companies, right? The incumbents could be only 5 years old or 10 years old. Yeah. And they haven't fully lost their innovation DNA. And a lot of the Gen AI technology is a little bit plug and play. So if you're like a 20-year-old company or even older companies, I think you are kind of in trouble, right? Because your company doesn't have the DNA to innovate. Maybe you're too used to inorganic growth, and this AI stuff is kind of blowing people's mind. But if the incumbents that you are sort of disrupting are like a 5-year-old company, like those people can still quickly add AI capabilities to their product, right? Yeah, exactly. Right. Obviously, I'm bullish on my company, but like it's not too hard for me to add AI capability versus a brand new startup in my space. Oh, we're AI native, but sorry, it's gonna take you some time to acquire 1,000, 2,000 customers, right? So I think the jury is still out. Everybody got disrupted, but I'm gonna try my best to.
Yeah, this is very interesting because the middle stage still kind of early, but still, after Series C. And
Right.
in the one hand, you have to compete with those really large 20 years old companies, which they have huge data. They have a lot of existing customers. They can train their data, but still their organization might be like outdated, etc. How do you, like within your corporation, within your organization, how do you keep innovation?
Great question. It's not always easy. I feel like if you start up, right, every person, right, probably younger, they're going to be organically, what does OpenAI just release, right? What is this new model that, I'm also in my mid 30s. I'm no longer in my 20s, right? I have a 1-year-old daughter. Like, my energy level and availability is not as, I have life as well. So, and many of my colleagues are in kind of this stage of their life, but they're still young, right? So I'm kind of in between, right? I have to do a little bit of pushing, like, hey guys, Mr. Software Engineer, like, if you're not like using Windsurf and Cursor, you're in trouble. I'm not sure you're gonna have a job in a year. Hey, Mr. Marketing person, I'm not gonna spend what I used to spend for you to hire an agency to write those content because AI can do a pretty good job, right? I want 5 blog posts a week, not 5 months, right? So some of those people need a little bit of pushing. Sometimes I say them nicely, sometimes not so much. But usually a good kind of innovative person, entrepreneurial person would be, okay, maybe there's some skepticism at the beginning, but once they've seen the power of, Windsurf, this really works, right? Like they start embracing it. There are also people who's kind of skeptical all the way through, and they may not be what you need. Because this wave is so disruptive that we all need that very quickly.
Got it. That's incredible, especially new founder. I realized sometimes those new founders, especially the AI founders, sometimes they were too optimistic about how innovative they are, but they neglect the fact that especially a lot of frontier runners, they're still keep innovating within the companies because
That's
of
right.
the credentials they have built. I think it really depends on the personality of founders. So that's how make the difference among the different kinds of players, right?
That's right. And I would say, with the exception of blockchain, right, which is a whole different set of things, there really hasn't been such big of a wave for almost a decade, right? Again, blockchain aside, the last wave was cloud computing and mobile device, right? Which obviously was major change. But SaaS companies have sort of looked the same from 2012 to 2022, right? But large language model changed all of that. So this is a gold rush area, and people need to move fast before we hit another plateau at some point.
Exactly. Let's move a little bit around and step outside your own shoes. Since you might be invited to adjust to a lot of different AI founders and new founders. So what advice would you give like new startup founders like me, and you are younger, the 20 or 21 dropouts from Harvard, MIT? What advice would you give them?
Yeah.
In the AI age?
Yeah, so I think there are things that have changed, and there are things that haven't, right? Founding a new company, usually there's a unmet need. Usually, like the product market fit means people are wanting to buy your product, right? Versus you forcing them to use your product. All of those sort of startup wisdom still is needed. Just because you have AI doesn't, the old saying, right? If you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. AI is like electricity. So yes, it's much more than a hammer, and electricity can do a lot of things, but you still need to do the hard work of discovering product market fit versus just throwing AI on everything and just believe that people will come. Like also, the base case, the baseline ChatGPT, which everybody have access to, is pretty good. So what's your business model? What's your edge on top of the baseline model, right? Which is the true commoditized electricity layer. So I think these are questions that you need to continue to ask yourself. Number two, usually companies are built when the incumbents are slow, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you should go attack them versus the kind of 1-year-old company disrupting 6-year-old company. So in some sense, the why now question still stays. What's the reason? What's your unfair advantage to tackle this particular idea? Number three is, like I said, I think people's expectation is much higher given AI that's available, right? Actually, both companies, I raised my seed round largely based on the idea. PowerPoint, prototype, right? These days, you show a prototype, it doesn't mean anything. You can make a prototype overnight with Lovable and all the tools out there, right? So that's not going to carry any weight in a fundraising conversation. So you need to have a prototype. It needs to be working. You probably need some early customers. I feel like the bar, especially for like a Series A, but for a Series A, it's like pretty high. So the expectation for a 5-person team now versus 5 years ago is very different. So you need to be more efficient. You need to be more AI native, and that's not easy.
Yeah, that's very inspiring. Especially when I was hearing, I like a lot to me, Susan, what we are building exactly mimic the things you mentioned, especially the product part, how to leverage the user experience using not the technology itself, but really how to narrow down a user demand. And it's not a pain point, as well as the fundraising, exactly as you mentioned. We very successfully, easy to get the seed round, but as you mentioned, the Series A currently in this area is much higher bar than before. That's very inspiring. So I think the last part of the dialogue, I would like to draw on a little bit outside the business part. Clay Christensen, in his last book is How Would You Measure Life, using the innovation theories to apply to his life because of the disease he had and the struggles he had, especially in the How Will You Measure Your Life book. Mention the things like the jobs to be done in your life. There are a lot: work, life, etc. And I recalled a very interesting example he mentioned in his book. He said that after 10 years of graduation from Harvard MBAs, he went back to talking with a lot of alumni. Many people in their graduation said, I had a lot of dreams, but I have to make money in the beginning. I will go back to my dream later in my life. But after 10 years, 20 years, it's still not going back. So how do you report? How do you find those theories relate to life, especially looking back all those years, and how will you balance your life, spend your jobs to be done in life?
Yeah, it's a great question. Figuring out, and it's a tough thing to balance, especially being a founder, because it's not a job, right? This company is your baby, and you deeply care about it, and it's very hard to disconnect your work with personal life. Like, I can go on vacation, but I'm thinking about the company just like I think about my family. I think different people want different things, but what you do need to be consistent with what you want. I have always been a pretty career-driven person, and it feels very different working for your own company versus working on a job. Right? I'm not an employee, but I pour my heart and soul when I know that something is for myself and there is a reward and price at the end. So, you need to make sure that is true, right? And, in a startup sense, right, it's, about the dilution, right, about the ownership, right? You need to make sure that the price is worth putting in the effort. And hopefully you are in a space, you're building a company that at least somewhat aligns with your passion. Like Frank, I'm sure you have a passion for education, you have a passion for knowledge, which is why you picked, this topic. I didn't come from a compliance background, but I love solving problems for, meeting unmet needs. I really like that. So that's what sort of kept me going. I also think that as people age, there are changes in their lives. I'm 36. The energy level is not as good as it was. There's more things going on at home. And that is inevitable, right? And that is part of life. So, which is why I highly encourage people to start companies in their 20s, right? I encourage people to do things when you have less to lose, and don't wait for too long. Oh, I'm gonna work for a couple of years, then go to business school, work another couple of years, and starting a company. That may work out, but you may miss the boat, and you don't want to be regretful of that a couple of years later. And last thing I will say is, I think sort of the desire to succeed, the desire to collect all those tokens, that also fades as you become more successful, as you become more experienced in life, that those things don't matter as much as you thought they did. And the sooner you realize that, I think the sooner you kind of liberate yourself and start focusing on what really matters.
Exactly. It's very inspiring, especially when you mentioned the balance between work and life as a founder. Personally, I'm also in this kind of a stage. My life reboots for everything, for life, for work at the same time. But for me, I just feel like the things can be sometimes like a combined. Personally, one of the main motives for me to working on something cool, something amazing in career, one definitely is my personal passion for education. But the second, still after having a child, I feel like I should be a role model or example for the child that I have. You also might have the same meaning as a father.
My daughter is so young. I think she wouldn't understand role model. I have a respect for my parents. They were both college professors. My mom moved to the States when I was 2, doing her PhD at Columbia. So, I have ties to academia, and they took risks on, searching for a better life for me and themselves. So, I learned a lot from them, and I want to give back to my kids, as well as other Chinese immigrants and Chinese Americans, where our demographic is not known to be risk-taking and to, be entrepreneurial. And I hope that, the things that you and I are doing can at least help changing that image.
Yeah.
Like, I think, some of the cliches, I do agree, right? Like, follow your passion, stuff like that. But more importantly is, I think you need to constantly think about what you really want. And don't be afraid to make changes if what you want is changing. Like, I feel like a lot of folks are doing things because of their own insecurity. They care too much about how others think. And I fall victim of that too. It's never too late to change. One day you decide that, okay, maybe you really hate your job, or maybe family is more important, or, you want to, we have people who become a chef, right? Like kind of do things like, as you realize, as long as you have the financial foundation, which, I think many of us do, you can let loose a little bit and just be honest to yourself about what you really want to accomplish.
That's great. Thanks so much, Sam, for this amazing episode. This episode is definitely very unique for both of us, and especially not only in career-wise, but definitely personally. I do believe that we should have such kind of reunion quite often with more and more fellow friends back in school, and reflect what we have learned throughout the journey back both in school and outside school. Thanks so much. The next episode of Aibrary Dialogue is very practical to everyone. In the age of AI, everyone is thinking about, with all those AI tools, can I drive my company's growth or drive better sales, but with fewer resources? That's why we are inviting Lamit Patel to be our guest of the next episode. Lamit is the author of Lean AI, which is part of the famous Lean Startup series. Lamit himself is a very seasoned expert in growth. He had led 4 times Axis, so very deep experiences in different organizations, and he turned all those insights into helping startups or innovators to have better growth in the age of AI with all those tools. We'll be talking about what are some new ways of doing marketing or growth with all those AI tools, as well as what our organization roles can be like in AI teams. Also for personal growth in the age of personal branding with fewer resources? How can you build your personal growth with all those AI tools? And last, what are some implications for education and our innovative future? So please definitely join us for the next episode.